A Column of Fire is a historical novel about espionage in the 16th century, time of Queen Elizabeth I. And I like to use spies in my stories. In the Century Trilogy, 3 novels which are set in the 20th century, several of the characters are spies. I like to use spies in stories, but you might like to talk about in the book group, why would I put spies into a story that isn't a thriller? What would the attraction be? Give you a clue, it has a lot to do with what they know and how early they know it. In historical novels of this period, Mary Queen of Scots is often treated quite sympathetically, and her rival, Queen Elizabeth I, is often portrayed as hard-hearted. And indeed, Queen Elizabeth I did eventually order the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, and you can't get more hard-hearted than that. But I don't actually portray Mary Queen of Scots very sympathetically. In this respect, A Column of Fire is different from other novels set in the Elizabethan era. And you might like to discuss, whether my characterizations of these two rival monarchs are accurate, and whether you sympathize, as I intend you to do, with Queen Elizabeth rather than with Mary Queen of Scots, or maybe you take a different view of the two of them. And that might be something about which different people in the book group could have different opinions. The most difficult part of A Column of Fire for me to write, technically, was the battle scene of the Spanish Armada. I quite like to have one big battle scene in a long historical novel. I think for most of my readers, a little military history goes a long way, and they certainly don't want lots of battles, but one big battle can be very interesting, I think. But this one was particularly difficult. Of course, the ships are at sea, so it's actually quite difficult for them to steer accurately. And ships in those days, irritatingly, did not have their names painted on them. So when a character sees a ship, he can't necessarily know what ship that is, what the name of the ship is. And it's very difficult. The Battle of the Spanish Armada involved more than 100 ships, and if you can't give any of them names, well, that was my first technical difficulty. And the second is that, of course, in a novel, everything is seen through the eyes of one of the characters. So whatever I describe to you, I can't be like a historian who can just tell you this ship was there and that ship was there and they moved and this ship fired and that ship sank. I can't do that. I have to say to you that Ned saw that ship, and then he saw another ship fire, and he has to know somehow what ships we're talking about, what ships he's looking at. And he has to understand about gunfire from ships and how accurate it was in the 16th century and how many of those cannonballs fell uselessly into the sea and so on. So knowing, as you do now, a little bit about the difficulties of writing a scene like that, did you like it? Were you fascinated by the battle with the Spanish Armada? Or did it seem to you an awful lot of technicalities that weren't very emotional? I hope it was both. I hope it was technically interesting and emotionally engaging, but you're the judges. My favourite scene in A Column of Fire is the one where Ned, who's the young man, happens to see the young Queen Elizabeth I in the nude. And it's a very intimate scene. They are not lovers. They're not going to be lovers. It's out of the question. He is, throughout the story, tremendously loyal to her and tremendously fond of her, but they never have that kind of a relationship in the story. But there is this moment early on where he sees her in the nude and he never forgets that vision. I like that scene, but it is kind of a bit off the wall. And you might like to say whether you like it, and you might like to discuss in the group, who likes it, who doesn't like it. Do the men like the scene? Do the women readers like it, or do they take exception to it? You as an author, you write what seems to you to be interesting and intriguing and enchanting, and you put it out there, and then you cross your fingers. So I don't know what you think, and it might be interesting to discuss it in the group. Column of Fire ends with Ned as an old man reflecting on his past, and the final part of the scene begins. His mind was like a house he had spent his life furnishing. Now, this is rather reflective. It's very short. It's only a couple of hundred words. I was very pleased with this little scene. But one of my editors told me to take it out. And an editor I really respect, very distinguished, brilliant editor, didn't like it and said, take it out. But I left it in because I liked it. And you might like to discuss what that scene does and whether that editor was right in telling me to take it out. Well, I hope all of that's helpful and interesting, and I hope you have a wonderful time in the book group.